In this Wargaming Tactics vlog, we're going to look at unit upgrades. When do we take them? When do they make sense? And how do we stay away from the trap regarding unit upgrades? Now, personally, I do tend to take a lot of upgrades on units because there's this coolness factor, right? We're doing this wargaming thing. We're trying to create that narrative on the tabletop. We're trying to create that moment of tabletop glory that we're going to remember years from now. Taking upgrades allows a unit to become more powerful or do some kind of unique things. I think it's perfectly fine for a narrative game, for a pickup game, for a friendly game. But as soon as we switch to competitive play, whether that's a tournament or I say to myself, hey, I'm going to bring the best list that I can, whether it's X-Wing miniatures, 40K, Chain of Command, I'm going to bring the best list that I can, upgrades go out the window. So let's kind of look at some upgrades. There's this idea where you have a unit or an element that you take, a squad, a ship, whatever it's going to be, in your war game, and it costs some sort of currency. Power points, points, battle value, whatever it's going to be, you're paying a price. Generally speaking, the more expensive the price, the stronger the unit is. And unit strength depends a lot on game turns. Unit strength could be the resiliency of armor or the number of wounds. It could be how many turns it takes to destroy. But distilling it down, putting it within that framework, the more you pay, the more powerful something is going to be. Now, on a completely side note, but important, how effective something is depends on the tactics, right? I can have this super powerful unit, but if I don't use it correctly, am I going to be able to earn? Am I going to be able to have it effectively dominate the tabletop? And the challenge on a side note with expensive units, paying a high price to buy a unit on the table, that means you have less points or battle value or squadron points, whatever, for the rest of your army. So you might be thin in some other areas. But we take a unit. We pay a price. Now we have upgrades. And those upgrades tend to fit within the narrative, reflecting in that moment different technological levels, different aspects of the narrative, different aspects of the timeline. A perfect example, if I'm playing Chain of Command, let's pull a few examples out. If I'm playing Chain of Command, World War II, I have my late war German squad. I can pay 3 additional points to upgrade those squad members from kind of normal troops to veteran troops. I can pay 3 points to upgrade to another machine gun. It comes with 2. I can upgrade it to 3. I can pay 3 points to upgrade to anti-tank weapons, exploring these different things. Now, whether 3 points is a lot or not, of course, depends on the system. But that represents outfitting the squad for a particular task at that time. X-Wing miniatures, you have the chance to upgrade not all, but certain and select ships, add some droids, add some torpedoes, add some missiles, add different subsystems. You are upgrading to represent that tech level. Now, here's where we have to be careful. First thing you need to look at, because all units have upgrades. When the unit is destroyed, this is kind of the matrix, the entry formula. When that unit is destroyed, the upgrades go with it. So if there is a unit that is somewhat fragile or is kind of average, I have to ask myself in the game, every war game has kind of this mid-level. This type of unit is average. It's not great. It's not bad. It represents the troops, the standard front line, kind of the standard of your military unit, your tabletop unit. You pay more, you get better units. You pay less, you get cheaper units. If it's in that mid-tier or less, I have to be careful because any upgrades I throw at it means it can still be killed by most things in the game. Likewise, really, really cheap units in cost or points, I'm not going to throw any upgrades at. I'm kind of looking at units that are a little bit more resilient, a little bit more powerful, so they have a base for those upgrades. But that can be a trap in itself, because if I'm already paying for an expensive unit and I start throwing upgrades on it, that unit becomes more expensive. And I only have so many points, squadron points, power points, battle value, whatever it's going to be, to go around. Now, in terms of upgrades, I'm going to break them up into three. The first are upgrades that are always on, always active. If I can buy a targeting computer that lets me hit instead of on 4s, it lets me hit on 3s or higher. That means as long as that unit is in play, I'm going to be taking advantage of it. These are the best upgrades because as long as that unit is in force, again, that upgrade is going. Second to this, the upgrades are expendable upgrades. Maybe I take a ship and I upgrade to torpedoes or missiles. I have a fixed amount, 2, 3, 4, 1, whatever that's going to be. The challenge here, of course, is how many do I have? How many shots do I have? And I have to put myself in a position to take that shot. If I don't get to take that shot, the upgrade is gone if I'm destroyed. If I take the shot, once it's done, or if it's 2 or 3 shots, once it's done, it's done. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It can give a strong unit an alternate way to attack or perhaps more punch. The third type of upgrades, these type of upgrades are random upgrades that happen in the moment. They are not resilient or reliant. A perfect example. Now, we're going back a number of years, but this was a great example of this type of upgrade that sounds good in theory, but see if you can discover the unlock. Warhammer 40,000, sci-fi-based grimdark game by Games Workshop. I'm playing Tyranids. Essentially, they're space bugs. They're bugs from outer space invading, trying to eat all the other armies. And they have different types of bugs that represent different types of warrior and military units. There is a space bug called a Carnifex. This is like a giant living tank. Think of like a giant, like super resilient, super powerful, jacked up, oversized land crab. Just massive. It's supposed to be the Tyranids, they're equivalent to a tank. They drop these bugs down as a tank to fight tanks. Well, right away, it's already expensive. I don't remember the exact points. Maybe it was 140 points just to buy in. But you say, hey, here's a unit that has a lot of wounds, a lot of armor. It's very powerful. It's really strong. It's not overly expensive for what you get. But then with the Tyranid army at the time, you had what's called biomorphs. So you inject them with these different mutations that create them to be more powerful. We also see this with Pacific Rim Extinction, where you can upgrade some of your kaiju. Love Pacific Rim Extinction, but the kaiju are expensive enough. So I tend not to take the upgrades. But if we're talking about this Carnifex in Warhammer 40K, you can take upgrades like Crushing Claws at the time. Maybe it's 30 points, 15 points. It gives you more damage. Well, you say, okay, that's always on. There is an upgrade called Regeneration. These are variable upgrades, and we're using this to illustrate for your own system. You tend to want to avoid those. So if I pay 50 points, I don't remember exact points, but it was a lot. I can have this biomorph that heals, that potentially regenerates my Carnifex. The Carnifex has a number of wounds, and every turn, if it's still alive, the wounds that it has suffered, so if it takes 3 wounds, I take 3d6, roll them out, and if I roll a 6, it's a Games Workshop game. All you need to know, 6 is good, 1 is bad. If I roll a 6 for each wound, I gain that wound back. Well, if you look and say, Fritz, that's awesome. You got this powerful thing. You can regenerate wounds and keep it going. Well, here's the challenge. I'm paying for that upgrade. It is a 1 in 6 chance. It's not like a 1d8 or a 1d10 or a 2d6. 1d6 odds are never tell me the odds, but they're pretty good. But they're not guaranteed. So I'm paying for an upgrade that is very expensive that I'm not guaranteed. What we also see is this kind of hidden tax. I would play 6 Carnifexes. I'd pay the points. If I upgraded those Carnifexes with all the biomorphs and I took the regeneration, super jacked up team, if I took the regeneration off all of them, I could get another 3 Carnifexes on the table, just in the cost alone on these upgrades. When you have, so an example there would be, I would not take regeneration because I want to get more guaranteed Carnifexes on the table. I know if I put down that model, it's going to work. regeneration, I don't know if it's going to work. So when you have these upgrades, a few in X-Wing miniatures and other games where it may or may not work, the points you're paying for to not have it work, better off buying another unit. So upgrades that give you a guaranteed, possibly. Upgrades that are expendable, which means they're going to work a number of turns, at least you can count on that, and then they're done, maybe. Upgrades that are variable, where you're not guaranteed to work, look at the cost. Look at the price of admission and see, is it better off not taking them and getting more similar material, units, squadrons, ships, men, whatever it's going to be, on the table. Side note, just to break the rules, I would sometimes take, I know I just told you I would never take these upgrades. Sometimes I would, because sometimes I'd be playing a casual game against, and I say this in all tabletop wargaming love, against some very good friends, and we'd be very competitive. So just to annoy them, just the chance to annoy them, to have them fire everything into this Carnifex and bring it down to 1 wound, and they're like, okay, it's dead next turn. And then maybe if I can roll legendary and roll a couple of 6s there and bring it back up, that's worth the price of admission against certain player personalities and certain good friends of mine to have that happen. So I do say there are some upgrades that give you some cool effects or some interesting stuff. And in a non-competitive tournament environment, maybe you do want to take them. Maybe you do want to take them for the lulz.